Okay, picture this. It's 2003 to 2004-ish, and the Wind Waker is the Zelda game of the moment. Unfortunately, it sold half of what Ocarina of Time did, so did Majora's Mask. Now, Zelda is by far one of Nintendo's biggest series and one of their most expensive to make. But during the mid-aughts, there was a decline of interest in gaming in general in Japan, and each game was selling less and less, so it was looking like Zelda could kind of be screwed. That's when series producer Eiji Aonuma decided that they were going to make, in his words, an American Zelda, something that American fans would dig. At E3 2004, remember when E3 mattered, LMAO, they showed the first trailer for the game. You can actually still watch this same trailer since it starts when you sit on the title screen for more than 2 seconds. Like, oh wow, that atmosphere is really powerful. Okay, time to start the game. Wait, hey, no. This game was gonna have a big grassy kingdom to explore, a bad boy version of Link, and edgy, realistic graphics that were already about to be outdated by the dawn of HD consoles. But that didn't matter to fans at all. You know, it's easy to look back on stuff like this and say, why are you guys getting so excited for something like this? It looks so flat. But if I was there in that crowd, I know I would have been just as excited. Miyamoto coming out on stage holding the Master Sword and a Hylian shield is also super badass. Aonuma has said that this dev cycle was especially tough for the team since it was by far the largest and most ambitious 3D Zelda game to date, but they would often look back at that fan reaction as motivation to keep on keeping on. Zelda may have a fan base as toxic as Paper Mario or Pokemon, but that doesn't mean the developers won't stop trying to please fans. And it seems like Twilight Princess did that for once, since it not only sold as well as Ocarina, it actually sold more, almost 9 million copies. You know, I wonder if that inspired those like shitty Wii printing money memes. Those were ass. Critically, it did really well too. You do have to keep in mind that this was a time when people actually respected IGN and GameSpot, so when these dumbasses say shit like, compared to the always colorful, cartoony affair that was Wind Waker, this stuff may as well be Resident Evil. People are gonna take that seriously. The game got high 8s and 9s from pretty much every outlet, and obviously it's well remembered and beloved by fans to this day. So, on a subjective level, how did this American Zelda turn out? What is the Wii's biggest launch title do for the console and the series? Today we're gonna go through the game and see if that decision and other decisions informed by it paid off. I'm Izzy-Doodle, and this is a long review of The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. Bro, my old file says I played this game for like 100 hours, but that's super not true. I probably just didn't want to walk to where I was in whatever dungeon I was in, so I would just pause the game whenever I had to walk away. Anyways, in this game you can name Link and also your horse. So this time we have Dookie Head and Pea Pants. The game starts in the middle of a conversation, so it feels like we'll be getting right down to business like in the previous games. They try to set the tone too, talking about feeling melancholy and lingering spirits and all that. The game immediately derails though because it makes me run around and do chores, herding goats, fishing, and babysitting the kids. None of those things are terrible in and of themselves as tutorial things to do. I mean, they've all got obvious functions, teaching you to ride the horse, fishing controls, and hanging out with the kids teaches you both the slingshot and sword attacks, both of which teaches you about the awesome power of motion control. But that doesn't mean they're fun to do. Like, do you really expect me to watch this cutscene where the camera spins around a cat 85 times and be like, wow, this really is the biggest Zelda adventure yet? In a lot of ways, this tutorial is the most comparable to Majora's Mask, I feel, where there's a linear list of things to do and a town that still lets you wander around. But instead of getting you familiar with some big game-wide mechanic or being immersed in a dynamic and interesting setting, you just sort of have to do a bunch of mini games and do stuff for people you'll talk to less than 5 times in the whole game. I felt very disengaged the whole time because I don't care about any of these characters at all, other than maybe Colin and the brothers. And I really only enjoyed the part where you save Tallow from the monkey because at least then you get to do some exploring and the action has a lot of energy to it. They kind of shot themselves in the foot right out the gate. If this section was supposed to have any appeal, one would assume that it would be living Link's normal everyday life before it erupts into a call to adventure. Instead, they write that Link gets to go to Hyrule in a couple days as an Orden ambassador. So not only do we know there's bigger things to expect later in the game, but we know right at the start start, there's a more exciting quest we could be sent on to learn the basics. At that point, you may as well stab a hole in my arm and just pour a gallon of Morton's in it. Walking around the village isn't even satisfying because Link's basic movement is surprisingly hard to get a grip on. I'll talk about the motion controls later, but as a regular controller, I honestly don't like the Wii Remote and nunchuck. The stick feels too sensitive and it causes Link to move around in a really slippery manner. It took me until the middle of the second dungeon to get used to it. It's really strange. The thing is, Link's default speed and movement are all fine. I really do think the stick throws the play control off. Pair this with the drawn out opening and you have a Zelda game that I honestly dread restarting every time I get the urge to play it. I'm just trying to run around Hyrule Field, not have an existential crisis. Fortunately, once the action picks up, it really picks up. All the kids get kidnapped, this weird goblin guy summons a cyber chase portal, and Link gets yanked into the Twilight Realm, turns into a wolf, and gets dragged away to Hyrule Castle. Here we get introduced to Midna, who, despite a design I'm not personally a huge fan of, is by far the best partner in any of these Zelda games. Navi was boring, Tattle had nice character development, the King of Red Lions was condescending but also had good character development, but what I'm here to tell you is that this girl is next level. She's got her own goals and basically forces you to work with her to achieve them. Sometimes she's an actual dick, like when she forces you to go get a sword and shield even though you're a wolf. But for the most part, her snarky assholery makes her endearing, especially since she goes through a similar arc to Tattle, but it happens more at the forefront and is more fleshed out. The section exploring Hyrule Castle and Twilight looks excellent too. The washed out color palette and computer-esque enemies and particle effects make it look unlike anything in any other Zelda game. In fact, it's in these sections that the game earns its T rating because the little particles that floop up into the air when you kill a Twilight creature were read as blood by the ESRB. I imagine that had to have some debate though, like, okay, Mr. Reggie, we looked at your game, we're gonna make it for teenagers. What? Oh, we're gonna make it for rated T. What? Why? Oh, well, we just saw that there was some blood in it, so what's wrong with you? That's not blood, that's a floating cloud thing. Miyamoto made it himself. What? No, it's just animated. Yeah, it's not real. Yes, it's not real. Yeah, I know. Lower the rating. Lower it. Now, no? You think I'm just gonna sit here while you ruin our spotless as a 2006 family-friendly brand? Well, guess what, fucko? My body is ready. This part kicks ass, and these Twilight sections are really where the game's darker tone bothers being fulfilling because you get to see innocent people cowering. You wanna save them. At the top of the tower, we meet Zelda. Unfortunately, she kind of ruined the world, but it wasn't really her fault because the adrenaline kicked in. To be fair, if I was watching all my bodyguards get totally choked out, I'd probably call it off too so I could keep my kink in private. You know, save it for the guy I met on Bumble. We get warped back to Ordon Village, but we're still a wolf. And ladies and c***s, that is the big twist of the entire game. It's even right on the cover. Oh, not this cover. The real one. They also made a plastic version and you can tap the figure on the screen. The biggest chunk of gameplay where you're forced to be Wolf Link is right here at the start of the game, so I might as well just talk about the form now. There's not a whole lot to it anyway. Get out your notepad because we're gonna do some comparing and contrasting. Here's all the stuff you can do. Wolf Link can dig stuff up, burrow through the ground, use his senses to see invisible stuff and follow scent trails, do a biting attack, and use Midna to jump across large gaps. A point Matthew Matosis made in his video that I really agree with is that this form has about as much utility as one of the transformations from Majora's Mask. But that game had two other forms in the 3-day loop, so the wolf kind of falls flat on its own. It can't even carry the game it's in and falls more than a bit by the wayside by the end. Probably the best thing about the Wolf Link sections is the adjusted navigation. You can't just climb up vines or go through doors as an animal, so you have to find alternate paths, which is kind of fun sometimes. Something else important is with both of the main regions after FARON, you have to explore them as a wolf for the first time. This gets you learning all the weird nooks and crannies from a limited perspective before you can freely and easily explore them as a human. Those are the only good parts though, otherwise I'm not really a fan of the wolf because of the limited abilities. The thing about transformation as part of a character's story is usually some sort of symbol for something about them or their character arc. Majora's Mask used its transformations to show how Link was carrying on these characters' legacies / just getting shit done. Freaking Steven Universe did it, The Witcher did it, Turning Red did it. Wolf Link symbolizes that Link turns into a wolf. As part of the story and as a gameplay mechanic, it kinda sucks major teats. I can't believe this game is losing to Turning Red. Jumping around Orden Village as a wolf is really trying to alienate the player. You know, show all these people Link has grown up with are on edge and are afraid of him because he's a wolf. But they're all just as butt ugly as he is, and none of these people were interesting to begin with. Oh, okay, yeah, you're gonna attack me if I get too close to your pregnant wife? Yeah, how about you save the sword for your chin? I'm literally just trying to dig up your life savings. It's mine, and all you care about is your partner, idiot. Exploring Faron Woods and hunting for bugs isn't that much fun either, but at least it doesn't take too long. And the jingle that plays when you fill the vessel of light and clear the area of Twilight is just super pretty. No, it just puts a smile on your face, you know? The light spirits are not super pretty. They kind of blow out the freaking screen. You have to put on sunglasses just to be in their presence. Fortunately for us, Link turned back into a person off screen, and it turns out he changed his clothes too, because now he's the chosen one. So now we can finally head across the forest and go do the first dungeon. After like 2.5 hours, oh my god. I feel like you could argue the pacing in this game is fast because we've done so much before the first dungeon, but it's really the opposite of that. It's so slow because we had to do so much before the first dungeon. In all 3 previous games, there was maybe an hour max of content you had to do to get to the next dungeon, but this game bloats that by 2 times for the first 3 areas. Zelda games always have their fair share of characters to interact with and set pieces, which this opening has a surplus of. The weird guy in the woods that tries to sell you oil and the bird who wastes their time attacking you if you steal a potion from them are my personal favorites, but this opening hasn't given us any real breathing room to actually explore, which is kind of the entire point of a Zelda game. But at least we can finally get started on the first dungeon, so hopefully we're in for a treat, because last game we were just eating plain grits the whole time. I don't really like the look of the Forest Temple, which is a very surface level observation. I like pretty much everything else about it. The attitude of the game's opening, where you need to do a bunch of wacky set pieces in the order the game tells you to do, actually carries over to this first dungeon pretty well. This temple has all the pros of Dragon Roost Cavern too. My favorite aspect of that dungeon was the variety of lighting, from deeper inside areas to well-lit rooms to going around the outside. This dungeon does something similar but with a green aesthetic, which unfortunately looks like mashed peas, but I appreciate the effort. You get a lot of actually thought-provoking individual room puzzles, like the one where you have to notice a chest on top of some random pillar across the room to get the key. The one where you have to notice the pattern on the floor to know which spinny things to hit in which order is cute too. And speaking of that, the item of this dungeon is the Gale Boomerang. Oh, Gale, that was my grandma's name. I just lied to you. Not only does it retain the multi-targeting from the Wind Waker, it also lets you target any specific spot and creates a tornado when you blow it. Throw it. Fuck. Now there's a more believable reason why it can bring other objects over to you. Between this, the slingshot, and the lantern, a lot of Link's Ocarina of Time abilities get brought back in refreshing new ways. The tornado, motion aiming, and resource-based fire make them feel brand new, and the Forest Temple makes use of them all in clever ways. This dungeon even requires some backtracking of you. Nothing too complicated since it still splits itself into halves essentially, but it does ask more of you than most other first dungeons do. However, I'd still say it's pretty difficult to get lost because you actually get more companions as the dungeon goes on. Your ultimate goal is to rescue, wait, hang on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, okay, 8 monkeys to reach the boss door. You rescue all of them one by one in different rooms, so they'll help you out by creating ways to rooms you can't reach on your own. As you slowly get more and more, they'll all work together to help you out. They even tell you where to go or follow you around, so this honestly feels like a Pikmin dungeon. I love having groups of characters follow you around, and I like how they show you the way by communicating non-verbally so they don't bog you down with 8 million pounds of dialogue. You have any thoughts on that, Midna? Every time there's a development in this dungeon, Midna pipes up to tell you what to do next. I really like her personality, but here I find it a bit much when she drags you to a stop every time she does this. If they made her able to talk without stopping the player, I would have found it a lot more enjoyable, but I guess Nintendo didn't know how to do that yet. It's probably the only thing I didn't enjoy about this dungeon. The mid-boss is simple but fun with swag music, even if the concept of stabbing this monkey in the butt cheeks is uncomfortable. Now I know it seems like I should be all for this, considering, but come on, I'm not Troy Barnes. I thought this was supposed to be a dark, serious game. This just breaks that aesthetic entirely. I really like when they show up in the boss fight to help you out with bombs. The boss itself took me some getting used to, but I got the hang of it pretty fast, and then it was a cakewalk. It literally dies in 2 sword combos. I always look forward to the endings of dungeons in this game, not because I wish they were over with already, but because when bosses die in this game, they fucking die. Holy shit. And the music that plays afterwards is so chill. It really makes you feel like you're getting a chance to catch your breath after pushing yourself so hard during a fight, and it still has that triumphant feel to it. Anyways, our 3 collectibles for the first part of the game are called the Fused Shadows. The light spirit we helped out earlier said we need to get these things, but that they're full of dark power, so we need to be careful. Midna also snatches it away from us as soon as we get it and refuses to tell us what it's for. Honestly, I find that a lot more interesting than how they did collectibles before. In Ocarina of Time and the Wind Waker, we know straight out the gate that the 3 things we get are going to help us save the world by helping us get the Master Sword, because morally unambiguous figures tell us it's a good thing to do. Midna's been a huge asshole so far, so for all we know, we could be dooming the world by helping her out. Sure, the Light Spirit told us to go get the thing, but Midna could just use that power to screw over Hyrule herself. We have no way of knowing. It's just another way that Midna proves herself as an awesome character and the best partner in the series. The Light Spirit says that now we have to head west to ELDIN, which even for Zelda is the dumbest name for anything I've ever heard in my life. But we're about to leave the woods, so maybe this will give us a chance to check out Hyrule for ourselves after such a long wait this time. And we're still locked into a tiny area. It's still a pretty great taste of things to come though. Walking into the area, seeing a panning shot of how vast even this smaller chunk of the field is while the thumping orchestra sweeps over you gets you pumped to explore. Unfortunately, while there are a couple things to do here for the sake of 100%ing the game, you can't even summon P-Pants yet. At the moment, it's just going to be more fulfilling to go to the next story objective. It's time to help the ginormous Eldin region recover from Twilight. This includes another bug hunt in Kakariko Village, but first we have to learn about more wolf stuff. This time we sniff this sword and get the trail of the Orden Village kids, which means we're gonna finally find them. When you sniff something, you can turn on your wolf sense mode to start following a trail. This only gets used a handful of times throughout the game because I think even the devs knew it blows. Turning on your senses makes everything around you pitch black, and it turns what could be fun navigation-based puzzles into literally following a big arrow to your next stop on the Hyrule guided tour. We also learn about warping. Whenever you beat these Shadow Beast guys, they actually make a new warp point for you so you can jump all over the place. In this section we use warping to put a misplaced bridge back where it belongs. I always like these types of puzzles because you need to stare at these huge objects and rack your brain to think of a practical use for them. The other obvious examples are the huge volcanic rock that helps you thaw out Zora's domain, and the stone bridge that completely blocks off a major chunk of the map that's just in Gerudo Desert. Ooh, I pronounced it differently that time, didn't I? That's just a major character quirk I'm developing right now. You never know what I'm gonna do next. I'm going crazy. These puzzles are also used sparingly, but it works more in their favor because you have to put together all the pieces on your own by remembering that ability exists. The bug hunt in Kakariko Village in the base of Death Mountain is the same as last time, although there are a few more scripted events this time. Seeing the kids with their new guardians is a super effective scene. I have my thoughts about this game's tone, but I can't deny that finally meeting up with these kids only to have have them A, be scared out of their wigs, and B, not being able to see Link at all is really distressing. Also, Link blows up a house and doesn't even care, which makes him an alpha omega or whatever. I can't smell his pheromones, how am I supposed to know? It seems like these Twilight sections really deliver the best story chunks. The verticality in the village makes the exploration more fun, although I had all these moments where Link would just do something stupid like...
Ouch.
Wow, this game's so realistic. I liked some of the bugs that had creative hiding places, but some of them were just sitting there. That's stupid. After this, we finally reunite with the kids, but the horse girl isn't with them. The whole group are still buttheads to Colin. And honestly, what the heck? Kids in real life are the worst people and pick on helpless people all the time too. So I guess it is pretty realistic. The only one that gets to be an asshole to him though, in my opinion, is the baby, because that's the funniest shit I've ever seen in my life. Mallow is one of the funniest characters in any Zelda game, and his side quest where he starts running a shop on his own is one of the better storylines in the game. I'm not joking. Our next stop is up Death Mountain, but we can't hold our weight against the Goron, so we have to go back to Ordin to get something to make us heavier. Okay, Miyamoto. On our way though, we get thrown into a minigame where we have to help tame Pee-Pants to get her back. Out of all the random stuff this game tosses you into, this is one of my favorites because the music that plays is wicked catchy and wicked underrated. Now that we have our horse, going to Ordin is less time consuming. And now we can ride across the part of the field that we just untwilighted. Nice. I guess this place will finally be open once we get rid of all the twilight. In Ordin, we have to meet up with the mayor, who gives us the iron boots so we can be as heavy as the Gorons. He also teaches us to do this horny as flip sumo minigame. It's not really that complicated, you just dodge and push to get your opponent out of the ring. But with all the slapping and the crotch and butt shots and Link's nipples. Sheesh, I'm all for some gay subtext, but okay, now let's go climb the mount, oh shit. This whole sequence is incredibly based. I love Colin stepping up and saving Beth at the cost of his own safety. I really love this bit of like comedy between King Bulblin and Barnes, the bomb guy. And then the fight afterwards has such an effective atmosphere. It's all set to be at dusk and the music that plays is tense and energetic. It incorporates this triumphant motif they use throughout the soundtrack in such a great way. Normally it just sounds like they want you to get excited to slash at a boss, but here it feels like you're getting an advantage. But Link has his friend's safety on his mind more than anything. Dang, why is all the best music put in the horse sections? There should be more cool horse sections so there can be more cool music. The fight itself is actually pretty sick, although horse combat turns out to be more than a bit, simplistic. You can just target stuff and attack away and the game will just handle it for you. Fighting on horseback at all is a neat addition, but it feels like there should have been more opportunities for the player to have to try harder. Then again, with the cinematic angle the targeting forces you into, that probably would have gotten obnoxious. So this whole point I'm making is really a puff of hot air. The jousting section that caps off this fight doesn't take super long, but gosh is it exciting. Rushing past each other and trying to get blows in before quickly turning around and doing it over again is awesome. Knocking King Bulblin off the bridge to end it is really satisfying and sets up an awesome rivalry between him and Link. That's right, this dude isn't dead, he'll be back. But the conversation with Colin and strength and bravery getting tied together doesn't feel as emotional here. I honestly feel like a moment like this would have been way more perfect later on in the game, but I understand why all this is here at this point. It's nice to see the kids stop being pricks to Colin though. About time. After this, climbing Death Mountain takes like 2 seconds with the help of the iron boots. We do sumo wrestling with a very wrinkly old Goron, which is debatably even hornier. Wait, why did I write this? Like, I'm looking at this like a month after I wrote it. Why did I write that? And then we can start the next dungeon. And even with the backtracking to Ordin and the huge horse fight, this section only took about 40 minutes, which is far better and more typical when compared to Ocarina of Time or the Wind Waker. Once again, the Twilight section bloats time between dungeons. Very cool. The second dungeon takes place within the Goron mines, and the music sounds like Diddy Kong dropping his first SoundCloud beat. As for the dungeon itself, it's sick and feels really labyrinthine. The two main mechanics of the dungeon are using the iron boots, which see a cool new use in the form of walking on magnetic walls, and the bow and arrow. The iron boot stuff is nice and creative and uses the same technology that they were using to make Super Mario Galaxy. I especially like using these lifts to get moved to different points in the dungeon using the magnetism. The bow once again gets to use the Wiimote's pointer, which makes sniping funny creatures from a mile away infinitely more fun than previously. That's the big benefit of using motion controls in this game. The Wiimote's IR pointer makes aiming more snappy and precise. Before it was too sensitive, and the first person perspective without a reticle made it basically impossible to gauge where you were actually shooting. Here the reticle and motion aiming makes shooting so fast and simple to do. I don't really like the waggle controls for the swordplay, but considering the button layout of the Wii remote and this game's status as a Wii launch title, I'm more than willing to compromise for the sake of pointer aiming alone. It's that good. I honestly might have to pick up Link's crossbow training just because it's so good here. Something else cool about the bow in this game is that you can combine it with a couple other items for sick effects. You can make bomb arrows for explosive ammo, which comes into play quite a bit. I really like this as an extension, but I don't like the binoculars. They make aiming too cumbersome for me. What's weird about this game is that the fire and ice arrows aren't anywhere. I can easily imagine combining the lantern with the bow to make the fire arrows at least. With bomb arrows, you use your bombs as the trade-off, so you could have used the lantern oil for the fire arrows easily. The lantern oil doesn't really add anything. You only need to whip out the lantern every once in a while anyway, so you may as well give it another use. As for the ice arrows, I just want them back. I don't know. I also don't know about these Goron elders, because they say they've heard about you, but I got the okay to come in here like 20 minutes ago, so there's no way that's true. I mean, this dude says he's far-sighted, not far-hearing, am I right? But having to collect pieces of the boss key is a unique approach that doesn't happen too often, so it's neat. I like how this dungeon and the forest temple have like many storylines that happen inside the dungeons. I wonder if all the dungeons are gonna be like this. The worst part of the dungeon is by far the boss. It literally did no damage to me. You just shoot it in the face, trip it up, and then go Matty Perez on him. This thing has zero stage presence and the music is super not memorable. Across the board, an F tier Zelda boss. Overall, the dungeon is probably like a high A tier. If this is your favorite for some reason, maybe it would be higher if the Forest Temple and Fire Temple and Snowhead Temple and Great Bay Temple didn't exist already. Sorry. The final Twilight section has more set pieces and a bigger scale than either of the previous two, but it's by far the most boring. It stretches itself thin because before you can even do the bug hunt, you have to unfreeze the lake. That means you do a massive NASCAR lap because you have to fly up to the top, get the water flowing, then go back down to the bottom to start the bug hunt, but that means that you have to climb to the top again during the bug hunt. I don't know why they designed it this way when you could easily have gotten some bugs on the way to the top and then saved the last few for the return trip to the bottom once the lake is filled. Bada bing, bada boom, 2 keys with 1 awkward Wiimote lunge. While we're at it, let's just get rid of that stray bug in Castletown. We already stopped there on the way to the lake. There's no reason to make us go back there when we could have unlocked that warp point the first time. Like, what is with this design? Sheesh. The Cargo Rock ride is ass because of the motion controls. This is another area of the game that really doesn't benefit because of them. It just feels like overkill. It's even worse because it's repeated twice here and reused for a terrible minigame later on. The boss fight for the final tier is a neat idea, although not anything special, but who cares? They clearly wanted to send these portions of the game off with a bang, so for that purpose, it's pretty harmless. I'm honestly so relieved these are done because for all their positive qualities relating to exploration and tone building, I don't think there's any reason you couldn't just enter these areas as normal Link and just be there and just progress the game. After this, Link receives a weird ass vision from the final light spirit. They explain that a billion years ago, the goddesses made the world and the place they touched grass became the sacred realm. Basically, there was a big war for the sacred realm, and these fudgewads called the interlopers, who were really good at rolling their eyes backwards and using magic, tried to steal the Triforce. No, not the Triforce. I hope nothing happens to it. Well, nothing did. The goddesses canceled them. The point is, if Link wants to go after some dark power, good for him. He just needs to know that it was sealed away for a reason. Now that's fine, I guess. But this cutscene really lays on the creepy imagery, huge air quotes. People without pupils, evil Link, normal Link turning into Dippin' Dots, I guess. Link's girlfriend laughs a bunch while strings from a freaking Blumhouse movie play. All these effects are neato for a real-time cutscene, but okay, look, Twilight Princess fans, I'm about to say some not nice things, so I warned you, okay? Just, how does this game benefit from presenting its story this way? In fact, how does does any of the story benefit from having this kind of tone? This is far from the only Zelda to have dark, horrifying stuff in it, but this is the one that everybody calls the dark one. Ocarina of Time had the Redeads, the Dead Hand Creature, the Shadow Temple, and actual guts. Majora's Mask was really depressing and had tons of actually interesting characters with great side stories built around the looping 3 days and everyone getting annihilated at the end of every cycle. Wind Waker even had dark aspects like Ganondorf kidnapping children and like the entire character arc the King of Hyrule goes through and Ganondorf snapping, not to mention Puppet Ganon. Oh yeah, and your grandma gets clinical depression. Those games handled all this stuff with a fantastic amount of subtlety. Ocarina of Time's direct juxtaposition between the past and the demolished future was a creative choice that gave you the motivation to stop Ganon to restore Hyrule to its former glory. Majora's Mask was dark, yeah, but it was legit depressing and then also had bright, poppy, weird stuff that made its world memorable. It's some Earthbound-ass, Metal Gear Solid-ass auteur feeling biz, you know? And the Wind Waker may not have any super scary stuff to look at, but it still takes you off guard because this stuff happens to charming, likable characters. In the Wind Waker, it's like, oh shit, my sister got kidnapped and I gotta do something about that now. In Twilight Princess, it's like, oh shit, this kid I've literally known for his entire life got lost in the woods. Who cares? I hope he eats a berry and trips out and dies. In Twilight Princess, you get a big panning shot demonstrating that all the Zoras are frozen in a big block of ice. In Ocarina of Time, you walk into Zora's domain and see the ice everywhere, and you only see that King Zora's been frozen when you walk back up to the top and you're like, wait, what? This game can't even stack up to the game it obviously wants to be compared to. I hate to over-explain what I mean, but that desire to make an American Zelda really just meant that Nintendo was willing to suck up to American fans by making this game one of the mid-aughtiest relics of all time. And while there are plenty of aspects of this game in its presentation that benefited from this attempt, and they definitely still made a game to be proud of and that they were passionate about, there are just as many aspects where the game falls flat the older it gets. The tone is just one of those aspects. I'd say the story of Twilight Princess is solidly laid out from a structure perspective, but every time it tries to have some epic or scary plot point, I just found myself going, oh brother, this guy stinks! And this was the point where my eyes got as rolled back as Ilya's. Fortunately, one of the game's many excellent aspects is right around the corner. With all the Twilight finally dispelled and over with, Hyrule Field is now very, very open to explore. This time it's laid out not unlike Termina Field, where the main town is in the center and all the main regions surround it in one of the 4 cardinal directions. The main difference is that each of those regions is basically its own landmass separated from the others. This world isn't anywhere as vast as the Wind Waker's ocean, but it doesn't need to be. Each chunk has plenty to explore. Other than the obvious issue of Hyrule Castle being accessible from all but one of the sectors, Hyrule Field is pretty cool to traverse, especially when you leap on your horse and shift into 5th. Unfortunately, finding things in it can end up being a bit lackluster. I mean, for one, the grass all looks like it's dying. They should really put some like fertilizer on it, maybe like spray paint it green. Most of the secrets get placed around the edges instead of interesting places in between. This was a big issue that Ocarina of Time had as well, but Majora's Mask and even Wind Waker had made some progress towards hiding secrets in more diverse places and in more diverse ways. This game's approach to everything is just Ocarina of Time, but more. I wonder if anyone's noticed if that's becoming a motif in the script. While we're here, we can start picking up some of the hidden skills. There are 7 optional sword attacks in this game that you learn from the Lich King over here, who's implied to be the classic and iconic hero of time. Yeah, that's right, and I saved 2 worlds and then I died and became a skeleton.
And now you know my cool backstory.
Yeesh, sorry dude, but could we just get on with the yes. Okay, so this dude teaches you some new combat moves, which is a pretty sweet addition that 3D Zelda combat has sorely needed. The Wind Waker made a step in the right direction by adding counter attacks, but this game added a whole slew of moves you can go discover. Right now we can learn the backslash, which is one of the counter attacks from the Wind Waker, and a shield bash. The shield bash demonstrates that some of them are better than others. A shield one has the worst motion controls in the game, like just Link, just do the thing. But at the very least, I understand where the idea for them came from. Anyways, to progress the story this time, we need to go back to the bar to help out Ilya. That dude's eyes are in his glasses. Ilya wants to heal this Zora kid, but unfortunately the only guy that can do it is the shaman back in Kakariko. Double unfortunately, Ilya doesn't remember anything, not even Link. That sucks, but the important thing to remember is that this is what Link gets for not worshipping the one true god. You have to escort them in this horse cart, and since the bridge is out, we gotta go the long way around. Holy sheesh, that shot was was stylish. That was like some Lego movie type cinematography. Like, who let Edgar write in here? Helping the girls out involves a rematch with King Bulblin, who has to be shot in the face now because he's got these ridiculous arm shields. The encounter is majorly badass though. It's really cool that Link has a rival in this game. They should do that more often. After this, the mission goes downhill because you have to try and keep specific respawning enemies away from the cart, otherwise the horse will get spooked and go in a big circle. I've always had a hard time getting this right, even now on my third playthrough of the game, so the mission always manages to overstay its welcome. I can only imagine at this point how discouraging this part might be for younger or newer players. After this, we have a short conversation with Telma that establishes this sort of freedom fighters type group Link is going to help out later on in the story, but I'll discuss them later. In the meantime, Telma really weirds me out. I don't dislike her character. In fact, I always love welcoming forward bartending characters. Plus, she's a major league girl boss, so we have to stan or whatever. To me though, the weird thing is how Eiji Aonuma feels about her. This dude said on camera that he likes the idea of being scolded by a woman like that. No offense, my dude, but what are you talking about? You're on the official Nintendo channel. Keep it in your pants, please. I think the worst thing about this is that now that I know there's one person that feels that way about her, now I know there's thousands of people who probably feel that way about her. I love the internet. After getting the Zora armor, we can finally enter the third temple. We've been playing this game for 8 hours, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. The Lakebed Temple is this game's water dungeon, and it's sick as hell. Like the Great Bay Temple, your goal is to guide a stream of water to get other parts of the dungeon going. In that dungeon, it only affected a couple rooms, but here it affects a ton of different facets of the dungeon. Your ultimate goal is to fill up the basin in the central chamber so you can swim over to the boss door, and you can move these stairs around to help out with that by redirecting the water through other rooms. It's a really unique mechanic and thematic throughline that really elevates this dungeon. Hey, speaking of the Great Bay Temple, that one mid-boss with the bubble comes back as this one random enemy who has less presence and appears multiple times. Honestly, I'm just impressed that Majora's Mask got referenced at all instead of like some Dark Link type enemy to further the Ocarina tie-ins. At this point, you have a bunch of items and the dungeon makes as much use of them as possible, which makes every room fun to explore and piece together. You can use the Zora armor to smoothly swim underwater, you can use the iron boots to walk around on the bottoms of rooms. Before this point, you acquire special water bombs so you can blow stuff up underwater, and you're actually required to yoink out some bomb arrows and blow some stalagmites off the ceiling. That's a ton of explosions though, so they put water bombs in literally every other chest. I can't tell you how many times I saw a fancy dungeon chest and thought, oh, I wonder if this will be another small key for something crazy. Okay, this dungeon also brings in the hook shot. Sorry, I mean the claw shot. I don't know why they changed the name, but it's basically the same dealio as every other grapple hook in Zelda. This one has the benefit of letting you slide up and down if need be though, which will get more interesting later on. I think this is also the earliest it's shown up in a game in this retrospective, comparatively, so with pretty much all the staples in Link's inventory at this point, that hopefully bodes well for the rest of the items we're about to get later on. The only issue I have with this dungeon is that it kind of ends right when it gets going. It only takes a couple water flows to fill up the basin, which felt kind of like the midpoint of the dungeon to me. But you've already reached the boss door. I'd say this is more fun than the water temple, but less satisfying to piece together than the Great Bay Temple because of its length. Ergo, I hereby dub the Lakebed Temple Baby's First Water Dungeon Junior. Can we just talk about how huge the boss is though? When it explodes out of the sand and starts swimming around, it's hard not to be impressed just because of how huge it is. I literally beat it in like a minute and a half though. All you have to do is get kinda close to the head, claw shot the eye, and stab away. It doesn't play defensive enough to make the chase a challenge. I can't say that, at the very least, it's actually fun compared to Fyrus. That was the boss in the last dungeon, by the way. After beating it, Midna actually apologizes for dragging us around to all these places, which feels more than a bit out of character. Maybe she's got a soft spot after all. It is nice of her to apologize at this point, considering as far as Link and her know, this is the last time they'll be stuck together. So I guess let's take those few shadows and go give Zant the business. Unfortunately, we don't really get a chance to give Zant the business because he's right there. He forces us into the Twilight Realm so he can force Midna to work with him, but she refuses to, obviously, so he steals the few shadows from her and forces her into the regular realm. He also shoves this weird magic thing into Link's brain that'll make him a wolf forever, and that'll just ruin the game. The Light Spirit helps us get away, but we need to rush to Zelda and the castle because Midna is severely injured. Basically, our whole situation is snafu'd right now. This part where we run to the castle is quite emotionally surprisingly effective if you ask me. The tragic piano string duet that remixes MIDNA'S theme and the rain that starts pouring really create a dire feeling that hangs over the scene. And with you being stuck as a wolf, being forced to run through the town is heartbreaking because people refuse to help you. Earlier in the game, this didn't really make that much of a difference because I didn't care about any of the people defending themselves, and I still don't. But the fact that there's a life on the line makes the fearful nobodies have actual weight. Unfortunately, there's a couple big problems with how this all plays out. The one that nobody talks about is how you drop into this wacky Poe hunt scenario, which starts out this game's little hunting quest. The main problem I have with this is that it just murders the flow because you're supposed to be like rushing to save MIDNA'S life. I mean, come on, hello. But we have to take a break to explain this funny little side quest with these funny Zelda characters. Even yanks open a path for you that's in a wacky cartoon chest, and it just really takes me out of the moment. I mean, hey, shut up. MIDNA'S dying. The other problem is the one that everybody and their nan brings up, that MIDNA'S lament is constantly interrupted by the enemy theme. It is pretty bad, but I think the main thing that's terrible about it is how inherently terrible the enemy theme is. Every single time it creeps in anywhere in this game is a ruined moment. Twilight Princess's OST is pretty good, which I'll get more into later, but the enemy theme is definitely an F-tier song. It's so in your face that I just want to yank my eardrums out every time it plays. So this isn't a problem that's exclusive to the scene, it's all over the game. After meeting up with Princess Zelda, Midna expresses that Zelda should do something to help Link because he needs to save Zelda's world. This may seem out of character for her, but it was hinted at the end of the Lakebed temple, and these two actually have been through a lot together. Plus, after getting her butt whooped by Zant, she probably either feels discouraged or like Link is the only person who can actually save both worlds. Zelda, getting all of this, decides to cure Midna, sacrificing herself in the process. Honestly, the games push it sometimes, but this game is definitely the one that should not have Zelda's name in the title. She's in 2 scenes and then kills herself. That's the opposite of legendary. That's like a shell of a person. Like a snorts 8 lines a day shell of a person. After this, we head for the Sacred Grove because the devs decided we have the green light to go get the Master Sword. This is the game's equivalent of the Lost Woods, and it's nowhere as interesting as before. It starts off with you howling Zelda's lullaby at this rock, which you've done a few times to this point. If you find these whistling rocks and copy the song they play, you'll unlock the guy that'll teach you a new sword move. Each of the songs you copy are a remake of the songs from the N64 games, which I'm a big fan of, and I think the instrumental remakes are great, but anytime the wolf howls come in, these songs sound horrible. It's a cute and creative solution to incorporate a musical instrument in this game, but in execution they went overboard. As for the Sacred Grove itself, it's just hide and seek with the school kid. There's a creepy version of Saria's song that plays, with a normal variant, a scary variant for when the dolls are chasing you, and a trumpet variant for when you're near Skull Kid. Other than this moment where the Skull Kid stomps around that's really well directed, this part of the game kinda grinds my gears. See, creatively the devs are stuck between doing this— holy shit. Creatively the devs are stuck between doing the same thing again, which is a trap they've fallen into a few times now, or twisting it into something kind of different. This has a twist on the Lost Woods formula, but it actually comes at the expense of being kind of disrespectful towards what they're adapting. The music and mood ruin the childlike joy of the OG Lost Woods and Saria's song, and Skull Kid being used as an antagonistic character could work if this is considered a new character, but obviously there's a distinct possibility this could be the same character as the N64 games, in which case this shits all over his character and his character development from each of those games. I'm just not a big fan of this area one bit. I do really like the statue puzzle though. I'm always a big sucker for spatial brain teasers. I've heard people complain about this and get stumped, but I really had no issue with this. Once you take the time to figure out the rules, you just gotta sit down and think it out. I was gonna add a funny comparison to something here, but I cannot remember what it was when I sat down to write this, so I'll let you fill in the blank. Comment down below with your thoughts so I can farm some freaking sick engagement. After this, Link obtains the Master Sword. This allows us to, well, have the Master Sword, but it also lets us turn into a wolf whenever we want. That means we can use Wolf Link's abilities whenever we want, and we can finally freely warp around. After being stuck in sections where we have to be Wolf Link, it feels like a huge reward to be able to use him as a tool instead of as a hindrance. After listening to that sentence though, you probably realized that reward is total bullshit. The first 3-day cycle in Majora's Mask forced you to not be Link too, but that tutorial was infinitely more fun and exploration based in spite of it. After that first hour, the transformations were tools you could use whenever you wanted. Twilight Princess's wolf sections aren't fun in spite of Wolf Link, they just aren't that fun, and they forced you through that junk for like 5 hours. All of that complaining being said, we're done with all those sections for the rest of the game anyway. I'm gonna refer to the first part of the game as the bullshit era, and then this next half as the horseshit era, because there's a horse. For the next phase of the game, the way to the next area is given to us by examining this map in TELMA'S bar. Earlier she mentioned that she's working with this group of people who want to make Hyrule great again or something, and she wanted us to check in and help out. We actually started getting to know the crew earlier since we could listen in on them when we snuck through the bar in wolf mode, but they were racist. They each have distinct personalities except for this one who refuses to speak to us. If you've been paying any attention though, you'll know there's only a couple people with a chin that wide in the game, and only one of them showed up in the opening cutscene. Each of the following areas has you meeting one of these wannabe heroes, promising to go do a dungeon for them, and then going straight to the dungeon after a short set piece or two. The first of these areas is Gerudo Desert, which unfortunately doesn't feature the Gerudo. I have no idea what the implication is supposed to be here, especially because the Gorons and Zoras are still around. Maybe the implication is that in the last 100 years or so they integrated into Hyrule, or more likely, knowing this game, they probably got executed for Ganondorf's crimes. Good job, Zelda. They could have all been sent to the Twilight Realm and become the Twilight. Kinda think of it, with their emphasis on magic, they could be descendants of the Sheikah. I don't think those guys appear in this game either. I said last time that Zelda lore doesn't matter, but the fact is there are plenty of interesting things in Zelda games to think about, and it's fun to engage with the community and fan theories or noticing little details. I guess my main point is that this is a universe that's fun to dig into, but that taking it too seriously kind of ruins the games as they stand, as they're more so focused on their individual narratives and gameplay mechanics. And trust me, next time we'll discuss how companies trying to directly engage with fan theories can make fan discourse way less fun, but we'll get there when we get there. Even though there's not an updated Gerudo town, Gerudo Desert itself is a really fun area to run around in. I love desert areas, and this one nails down that desolate, muggy atmosphere, especially with that music. Come on. The choir and reed instrument chained together to make a heat-seeking wombo combo. The desert isn't very long in the path to the dungeon, but it has plenty of extras to come for, so it's always my favorite area to split into a few visits. This area also introduces these pigs from the Boblin gang that you can ride. They have this really long and hard to control charge that makes them ideal for busting through walls. With one of the major facets of this version of Link being riding experience, it's great that at least one area of the game has another creature you can mount. I think it would have been cool if there were a couple others, like maybe a flying creature of some sort, and one that goes in the water as well. After bashing and sniping our way through a Boblin fortress, we have our third encounter with King Boblin. Jesus, stay dead, my guy. This time it's a straight up actual fight instead of a joust. Now, I have some cool moves at my disposal at this point, but the thing is, they make this encounter end after a couple seconds because they're optional, more powerful attacks. Yeah, all the cool moves you can learn are totally optional, which means none of the enemies you fight are built around them. This was also something I thought about a lot during the following dungeon, because it would have been really cool to go sicko mode on some stealthos, but you can just take them down with some normal sword slashes because there's no way for the game to know you have the cool attacks. That unfortunately takes away from the initial cool factor of this fight with the king as well. He still gets up afterwards though, so maybe he'll learn some better tricks for next time. Although it borrows the premise for its first half from the Forest Temple in Ocarina of Time, the Arbiter's Grounds still manages to be a thought-provoking and fun dungeon. This game is on such a roll with dungeon designs that I may as well call it butter. It has plenty of puzzles that require you to be aware of your surroundings, and even though you're not likely to ever get seriously turned around, you will have to put your brain to work, which is that perfect balance. Wolf Link even sees some decent use during the dungeon, using sense mode to see invisible enemies like these rats, as well as using the scent of the first Poe to track the others. A weird detail with the Poes is that they look like they're mouthing words at you when you engage them. I mean, what the heck are they saying? Who cares? They're dead now. Wait, well, they were already ghosts. Wolf Link also gets to help out in the mid-boss for the dungeon, which is a ghoul that's holding a massive sword. Upon defeat, it bursts into a bunch of bats, which is a pretty clear homage to Majora's Mask again. The second half of this dungeon goes by super quick because the item is the spinner. Check this out, I can read your mind. It might look ridiculous. Nah, but seriously, it's super fun to use. You can glide over the quicksand that's been a nuisance for most of the dungeon, and then attach to these wall slots to ride around and launch yourself all over the next few rooms. It's a ton of fun. I wish there were more items like this in the series. It adds some unique platforming to Zelda that actually really fits in. You can also use the spinner to interact with these slots that make scripted sequences happen. This dungeon doesn't feel like it goes on for too long, but unlike the Lakebed Temple, I don't really feel like it stopped right when it was hitting its stride. It goes on for just long enough and doesn't have any flab you have to deal with, and the boss is an embodiment of that. The first phase can get a little frustrating with how the pop-up bodies choose to pop up, but it won't take you forever to take care of, and the phase where you leap back and forth to dodge attacks is exhilarating, and honestly could have gone on for longer and gotten more challenging. But this boss doesn't have any extra garbage, it's all fun, and ends while it's on top, closing out another fantastic dungeon. I forgot to explain what we're even doing here in the first place. Our goal for coming here was to find the Mirror of Twilight, which is apparently the only link left between the two realms, and thus the only chance we have at going after Zant. Midna begs us to come with her to help her out and makes me cringe in the process. Fucking stop. Unfortunately, somebody busted the mirror into 3 more silly collectibles. These characters, who are supposed to be the sages, but come on, explain that Zant is using dark magic from Ganondorf, who was sent to the Twilight Realm 100 years ago after he got swatted by Zelda at the end of Ocarina of Time, like the post-credits end. So now the next 3 dungeons are about collecting those pieces. You know, while we're here, what the hell are these designs for the sages? They're just so aesthetically off-kilter. But I guess that's nothing new. The humanoid characters in this game have looked pretty terrible since Go. This game wants to look pretty mature and has given most of the friendly NPCs like Goron's and Zora's realistic proportions. They don't look too bad from a design standpoint, and some of the humans like Link, Zelda, Ganondorf, and Agatha also look fairly slick. But so many Hylian characters look weird and stretched out. At least when the monsters have weird proportions, they're monsters. Things that are supposed to be gross and creepy. These are people I'm supposed to want to walk up to and talk with. They make me want to yell stranger danger. Ugh. I don't know how to deal with these guys. You know, how do I get rid of weird adults I don't know?
Don't answer their questions. Don't accept any gifts. Don't accept a ride. And
What was it? I just typed in stranger danger on YouTube. What the frick is this? I'm gonna be real. I forgot what I was even talking about. Stranger danger retro. Oh yeah, the graphics. Another issue is that the textures continue to look worse and worse over time. Just all of them. They look so blurry at the Wii's 480p resolution. The HD remake does look better, but only by so much. There's a pretty clear cap on how good this game can look. With HD consoles on the rise, which was a trend Nintendo actively avoided, an attempt at a more realistic looking world has aged pretty poorly, and Nintendo has made the right decision to stick to more stylized art styles for the sake of its less powerful hardware in future games. I think the main problem with the art direction is that they wanted to take on a more self-serious approach, but also have the whimsical character design Zelda and Nintendo games in general are known for. The end result is a drab-looking world with a grab bag of decent-looking to off-putting looking characters. Twilight Princess has achieved plenty of impressive visual feats like large sprawling areas, intense set pieces, and the eerie Twilight elements, but overall its art style comes across as confused and far from the cohesion that Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and especially the Wind Waker managed to achieve. It just goes to show that changing everything isn't enough. You have to do it with the intention of making everything fit together well. That's something I considered a lot when I was making my current redesign, which I am debuting right now in this video right in front of you. What do you think about it so far? Haha. Okay, glad I finally got that out of the way. On to the next dungeon. Where is it? Oh, it's SNOWPEAK. This area is the last hurrah for the required fishing, since you need to catch this smelly fish to cross the ice flows safely. Pretty inoffensive, but other than the music here, I wouldn't say there's really anything special about this area. Meeting the Yeti is awesome. He's gotta be one of my favorite characters in this game because he's actually happy-go-lucky and introduces us to snowboarding. I mean, he just looks likable. What's his name? Yeto? Dude, this dude is so based. Hey, you mind if I call you Based Yeti? There's this bass pumping track that plays when you do the snowboarding as a minigame later, but honestly, speeding through the mountains with the minimalist track behind you is kind of a vibe. I imagine that if I ever work up the nerve to go snowboarding in the mountains myself someday, I'd probably get a feeling similar to this, once I get the hang of it anyway. At the bottom of the hill is this dude's house, which is the next dungeon. Let's go! It's time for
Based Yeti House.
The setting for this dungeon is a rundown mansion, and the setup is that cringe Yeti wife got sick, so she can't take us to the mirror shard, but she can tell us where it is. The places she tells us to go to end up being foods that get added to the Based Yeti soup that he's making for his wife. This dungeon sticks out from your usual dungeon, and it's ended up being a fan favorite from this game as a result. I really liked the little mini plots in the first two dungeons, so it's nice to see a dungeon that really capitalizes on that in an even more hands-on way. Obviously, I don't want every dungeon to be about someone telling me where to go, and I wouldn't say the puzzles suffer because of it anyway. It's a great one-off concept that's executed excellently. The dungeon item, the ball and chain, is a metaphor for how Based Yeti resents his wife.
It's funny because marriage is terrible.
But it's this game's equivalent of the hammer in that it's not that diverse or fun to use. It's way more badass than the hammer though. You swing that thing and bash everything it hits to freaking bits. After this dungeon, you really never have to worry about using it ever again though, which is a problem the spinner suffers from as well. The boss fight is really the highlight of the whole thing. Basically, cringe Yeti wife undergoes yossification and becomes cool as hell, and we have to cancel her. This boss keeps you moving and it's fun to ping pong her around. The music is especially great in this fight, especially when the victory jingle kicks in. As the Yeti couple has pity sex one last time before deciding to get a divorce, we hightail it the frick out of Based Yeti territory and head straight for the next dungeon. I'm gonna be real, this bit probably makes no sense if you don't get on Twitter, so I'm so sorry. There's not really anything of note between these two dungeons, except that we shoot Skull Kid in the face with an arrow like 5 times. Oh yeah, you think that's fun? Just wait until your dad sees the hospital bill. After this is a new version of the Temple of Time. I'm not sure why this had to be the Temple of Time other than more Ocarina fan service, but oh, whoa, slow down, little guy. That's Uku. She's been showing up since the first dungeon as a way to warp us to the entrance, and she's been following us around for the rest of the game with her creepy son. Not to say she doesn't look creepy too. In this dungeon, she's trying to find traces of her civilization, but that's really it. I'm surprised I've forgotten to bring her up by this point, but I might as well do it now since her race is what the next dungeon's all about. Anyways, this dungeon has a weird structure, but it tries a different approach to linearity compared to SNOWPEAK Ruins. It is by far the most floors out of any of the temples in this game, so you follow a pretty straight path and solve some cute but easy puzzles along the way. There was really only one point where I got confused and had to use the map to work it out. Other than that, it was smooth sailing. Not to say it was bad, because for the 6 millionth time, this game can't really be bothered making a bad dungeon, but it's very straightforward on purpose. After the halfway point, we get the Dominion Rod. This item is basically like the command melody, but it's a lot easier to use and it adds the wrinkle of having to control Link and the statue at the same time. Unfortunately, the control is limited to the statues, and like the spinner and the ball and chain, its use outside of this dungeon is limited. While it lasts though, it's badass. Using this huge statue to bash the shit out of all the obstacles that held you back on your way up while helping the statue back down is really cathartic. It gives the linear design purpose since using the statue breathes some fresh air into the reused rooms. The boss isn't anything special, but getting to viscerally bash its guts in is still a good time, and the twist where the eyeball is a weird little spider is goofy enough that I can appreciate it. Now this whole time Midna keeps saying stuff like, oh, we have to fix the mirror so more creatures don't get transformed. Girl, this spider is 100 years in the past, who cares? She said that about cringe Yeti wife too, but it doesn't amount to anything more than another meh attempt at some dark stuff. Corruption via darkness is nothing new for Zelda, and all she has left to say when we get the last mirror shard is that it's time to go after Zant. You know, what's the point of— you know what? Nope. I already talked about this. Back in the future, the present, we need to get the Dominion Rod fixed so that we can go into the sky and find the last mirror piece. This launches us into a segment that's pretty much just the Triforce hunt from the Wind Waker, except this time in the more convenient to cross world of Twilight Princess. It's even structured similarly. In the Wind Waker, you had to find 7 charts and then go look for the Triforce directly. Here there's a similar section where you have to do preliminary stuff to even kick off the quest, and then you can actually do the quest, but it's more story driven. First, we have to finally cure Ilia's amnesia. This section is honestly really boring because you have to run back and forth a whole bunch, but it eventually culminates in one of the best set pieces in the game in the Hidden Village. Here you have to run around and snipe a bunch of Boblins so this old lady comes out of her house. The developers decided to make this section Wild West themed. The town is laid out in 2 rows, so it feels like you're in position for a shootout before you start running around it. The music is also super cowboy themed. I really like cowboy aesthetic stuff, so this is my jam, literally and non-literally. There's also this side quest you can do where you talk to a bunch of cats that uses the same music, but the lady gives you this horseshoe-shaped thing that Ilia had where they were trapped in the village together, which finally restores her memory. This is supposed to be a really heartwarming scene, but that's really pushing it because it assumes I care about anyone from Orden besides Colin. Ilia is kind of implied to be Link's love interest throughout the game, but I really do not buy it because there's literally nothing cool about her. She only has this quirk of being called a horse girl, and for anyone above a 2nd grade level, that probably has no appeal anyway. I'm sure this game has an avid discussion about which girl Link should be with going on like Ocarina of Time did. You could choose from Zelda, Agatha, Ilia, maybe even Telma. I think Link's considered an adult. You'd think that the game that's trying the hardest to be a sequel to Ocarina of Time would at least outdo it by having twice the bitches. Instead, the only one that ends up mattering at all is Midna because she's an actual 3-dimensional character. Really, it's not just Ilia or the I can't pronounce this, or the Ordonians that have this problem. It's all Hyrule. Castletown is neat when you're walking through it, all the bustle and crowds, lots of details to keep track of, but none of these people react to anything in the story. Hyrule Castle gets invaded and put inside a giant octagon, and none of these people say anything about it ever. I'm supposed to feel bad for these people, but no wonder they got stormed. They leave the gates open 24 hours a day. What the fuck is wrong with you guys? All the best story stuff in this game has to do with Midna and the Twilight. She actually has goals and experiences character growth as a result of conflict, and even Link can't really say that for himself. We're just the main character following along the real protagonist's journey, which I'm more than okay with. Link is really brain dead and silent anyways, but the rest of the people in this world should have reacted a little bit more. Only a handful of them show any fear in the Twilight sections, but the world of Hyrule feels so artificial and video gamey when it comes to its inhabitants interacting with the story. After this, we have to take this book the Hidden Village lady gives us and use the newly fixed Dominion Rod to find these owl statues and use them to collect 7 parts of the alphabet. That is not a joke, you are actually collecting letters. They tell you where all the statues are, and you just have to go there and do a short Dominion Rod puzzle, and each of these locations also have an optional chest nearby that you can do a slightly more complicated Dominion Rod puzzle for. All in all, I'd say this is a big improvement on the idea of a worldwide treasure hunt because it accomplishes everything the Triforce hunt tried to do in like a third of the time. It only took me about 45 minutes to finish the Ilia crap and then like 20 minutes total to do the actual statue stuff. I'd even accept it being a bit longer because it still would have been shorter and less tedious than the Triforce hunt. After warping this huge cannon over to Lake Hylia and having it fixed by the clown guy, we can finally head for the final main dungeon. The city in the sky probably has the second most creative aesthetic in the game, and it's also by far the biggest in scope. You can tell they really wanted to blow you away with the size too, because they do this big sweeping shot of the whole place. But the entire place is split into a bunch of tiny chunks, so the larger area you can see from the start is all these low poly models you aren't supposed to see up close. You know, they're supposed to fill in the area from a distance without taking up too many resources. You know, the thing Spyro invented. As for the dungeon itself, it's pretty great and uses a lot of really fun gimmicks. Since this is the city of the Uka, naturally you can grab them and glide around with them. As the item, you get another claw shot, which means you can hold onto the wall and shoot the other to zip around. My favorite part is when you can target the targets that you can Spider-Man. It's awesome. I'm kind of talking in circles at this point. Every dungeon in this game has a great theme, great puzzles, great design, blah 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 blah. I've definitely made my point by now. There's not really anything else I can say. For all its shortcomings, Twilight Princess honestly more than makes up for it with its dungeons. I'd say it's as good as Majora's Mask, but it also has more of them on the same scale. So maybe it's above Majora's Mask in terms of dungeons specifically. That all being said, this place kind of falls apart in the last room. You just have to wait and pray to the Lord above that you don't have to go around again in case you miss a shot. They force you to aim at the most awkward angles too. And the boss fight is a huge mess. Argarok, more like I want to hit him with a 50-ton anvil-shaped rock. This fight dealt damage to me 0 times. It isn't aggressive at all. If anything, the biggest challenge it presents is one of patience. The only kind of cool thing it does is try to juke you for the last hit by turning around. Other than that, it sucks. Even Midna doesn't say anything about it. She just talks about how it's time to go bash Xanth's usurping little face in. Honestly, I'm with her on this one. Let's go take care of him. Before they enter the Twilight Realm, Midna shows that she ran from her people because she was ashamed of the imp form that Zant stuck her in. When she saw Wolflink, she realized he was the hero of prophecy and wanted to use him to save her world. However, as we've seen, she's grown enough by traveling with Link to realize that taking out Zant will save both worlds and that that's what needs to happen. It's not the most out there arc ever or anything, but it is an arc. Zelda can have pretty great story beats when it wants to, and Midna is handled with probably its most solid set yet. I'd love to see more characters like this presented in future games. The Palace of Twilight itself is made to be a fairly straightforward follow the path dungeon. Throughout it, you'll deal with a bunch of new mechanics. The darkness crystals that force you into wolf form, Zant heads you have to beat waves of to get keys, Phantom Zant, and most importantly, this game's take on the Wallmaster. Usually these guys just wait so they can grab you and toss you back a couple rooms or like split into a bunch of hands or slap you. But in this game, all they care about is balls. Take that, Map Pat. The dungeon has these long straight rooms that you have to bring the balls back to the start of. These guys will chase you and try to take it back to the end room. Not only is this scenario tense because you're being chased, but there are also points where you have to put the ball down to raise up stairs or toss it up ledges. You have to keep it moving as much as possible to stay ahead of the hands. This dungeon also makes this difficult because they pile a ton of enemies on you. Ow, hey, ow, hey. That's probably the most difficult dungeon for that exact reason. I kinda dig it. This game's been pretty light on the difficulty. It's harder than Wind Waker, but nowhere near as much of an asshole as Majora's Mask. Yet another way the dark tone doesn't add to the experience. These new obstacles all receive major payoffs as they're kind of arduous to deal with at the start. Halfway through the dungeon, you get another sword upgrade, and any excuse to hear the Master Sword jingle again is great. I've never mentioned this before in any of these reviews, but it's always been one of my favorites. This upgrade puts the Twilight God's power in your sword, so you can one-shot every enemy and swing your sword to get rid of the darkness crystals. This also ties into the storyline, as even the gods of this realm are on your side in your quest to take out Zant, and the upgrade in power reflects that well too. On that note, let's just skip ahead and see what goes down around our Zant Crown bound throwdown. Upon meeting him, he explains that he always wanted to be the king, but that upon his rejection, he got super upset. At that point, he found Ganondorf, who gave him the power to take over this world. Oh yeah, and Zant basically melts down and turns into a cartoon baby. A lot of people like to complain about this twist, but honestly, I really enjoy it. Ganondorf was obviously gonna be the final boss because the sages failed to kill him earlier in the story, so it makes sense that the baddest bad of the Twilight Realm would be under his control. The personality shift could have been handled better with some foreshadowing, but it honestly adds to the story more than it takes away. Zant was just another imposing bad guy earlier, so this at least gives him something that only he's done. The boss fight with him is fine, but I would have preferred a more fleshed out fight with original mechanics instead of an annoying boss rush. His death scene kind of sidelines him too, with the emphasis being placed on Midna's new powers instead of the fact that we just killed who's been the big bad of this story up to this point. Either way, all we need to do now is head over to the castle and kill Ganondorf to save both realms. Eventually. Before we do that, I wanted to take the time to talk about some of the major side quests that occur. I already talked about some of the minigames and the hidden skills and the problems those entail, but I want to dive into some of the other ones and their rewards, what's great about them, and what's lame about them. The Poe Hunt side quest is like this game's version of the Gold Skulltula hunt. The only difference is that the Gold Skulltulas didn't totally fist you. There are 100 Skulltulas to get in Ocarina of Time, and you have to hit them a couple times and grab their token. It takes about 2 seconds and it provides great constant feedback. It fumbles its final reward, but there are some nice little checkpoints until you reach 50, and then you can honestly stop. Twilight Princess tries to be nicer by only having 60 total Poes to hunt throughout the second half of the game, but they aren't nearly as satisfying to collect. First of all, you have to turn into Wolf Link and turn on X-ray mode. They might take a while to float above you, and then you have to awkwardly jump at them before ripping their soul out. Listen to that, that should be satisfying. But the other problem is that these peeps aren't even hidden. They're usually just hanging out in the open. You aren't looking around or listening, you just see the lantern, so you're like, oh, well, I guess I'll take a minute and do this, I guess. There's only 2 rewards. At 20, you get an empty bottle with some vintage rosé, and at 60, you get money. So basically, this side quest doesn't matter after you're a third of the way done with it. In Castletown, there's this girl named Agatha who wants 24 golden bugs to come to her ball. Now, normally, I'd refuse to interact with an e-girl, but she gives you money, so a job's a job. Hunting the bugs is way more fun and honestly closer to how the Skulltulas were. You have to listen for an audio cue, then sneak up on them, and you can just grab grab them. It feels awesome to snag all these little guys, and Agatha will toss 50 freaking rupees your way for all of them. 100 if you make a pair of a boy and girl bug. As for Agatha herself, she's clearly supposed to be another weirdo character. This game likes to throw as many of those as it can at you. I don't really care about her that much. Her bug motif at least makes her stick out from the others. There's a lot you can do with that. I mean, just look at all the crazy stuff she can do in Hyrule Warriors. Really, the weirdest thing about her is why and how she's here looking for bugs and wanting to be the bug princess. They never really explain that, and it's one of the few times this game bothers to have something really mysterious. Honestly, Agatha feels like this game's equivalent of Tingle, think about it. The only other side quest is helping out Mallow, another one of the game's strangest characters. This side quest lasts for most of the game's playtime depending on how long it takes you to rack up rupees. But if you team up with Agatha, you'll be making bank anyway. Basically, Mallow wants to open up a shop with cheaper prices in Castletown. Unfortunately, the bridge is out. By giving them 1,000 rupees, you'll fix it. This also allows you to enter Castletown from the west gate, which is nice. Next, you'll need to bring this guy some spring water by trekking across part of Hyrule Field. This is the closest the game gets to a trading sequence, except it's only one part long. This part would seem tense, but the enemies can't actually get that aggressive since your mobility is nothing. Even if you fail though, it would only take you a couple minutes extra. After getting this Goron wet, you can give Mallow 200 more rupees, and then this store that wouldn't even let Link enter before because of his shoes are too muddy or something becomes the Castletown branch of Mallow Mart. I love this place. It has one of the most standout tracks in the game, and it shows some ridiculous personality that outdoes any other attempts at weirdness that Twilight Princess has. On that note, I guess before we dive into the final stuff, we should discuss the music in this game. Yes, I am still keeping the mixtape moniker. I know my two fans really care about that. Thing is, this is probably one of my least favorite Zelda soundtracks, actually. I know that's a wicked controversial thing to say, but compared to the last 3 games, this game taking on a weird tone kind of hinders the soundtrack. The other element that bugs me is that they didn't fully orchestrate it. Koji Kondo decided to stick with synths, citing the lack of interactivity that comes with orchestral music. I have no idea what that means, and they'd obviously figure out that end of it later on, but for now what it means is that the sound team used the best MIDI samples they could, but still made a very synthy sounding score. The weird thing about it is that they wanted it to fit the epic tone of the game, so they made it sound big and orchestral, but I can tell that it's synths. So I've already highlighted a lot of tracks throughout this video, but there's a ton of great ones I haven't really touched on. All the overworld themes, like the main Hyrule Field theme for daytime and nighttime, and Lake Hylia are excellent. The mid-bosses all share this really pulse-pounding song, and the bosses all have excellent and unique themes. I think my favorite part is how they get reincorporated into this trippy, trappy remix during each phase of the Zant battle. themes for the Goron area and Zora's domain are back and sound really awesome this time. A lot of the dungeons are no slouch either musically. The area that's lacking the most this time are the character motifs. I mean, what am I supposed to latch on to here? Ilia's theme, Xanth's theme, the Light Spirits, or I don't know, Queen Rutella? Those songs don't even really have a lot to them. I don't even care about Zelda's lullaby at this point, especially because she's in the game for less than an hour. There are a couple excellent ones though. MIDNA'S theme tells you a lot about the character, and something nobody ever really points out is that the first 3 notes are almost the same as Zelda's lullaby. They're just in a different rhythm and given different harmonies. This emphasizes the parallel nature of the 2 characters as royalty of their respective worlds. Probably my favorite motif is the one made to emphasize Link overcoming one of his many trials throughout the game. It's a big part of the Hyrule Field theme, and it truly feels like this game believes in Link as a hero because it comes in at his most triumphant moments. It's a very successful leitmotif. At the end of the day, even if I say this soundtrack is weaker than the others, it's still a Zelda soundtrack. This series already has so many iconic songs, so even if one entry has like 1% less than the others, that's still a better track record than most other games. For the sake of being dramatic, I took one last ride while I headed for the final dungeon instead of just warping there. It seemed more fitting for this game's wannabe epic tone and gave me some time to reflect on MIDNA'S journey. Midna uses the Fuse Shadow to bash apart the magic barrier and nobody in the town cares. Inside the courtyard are a bunch of enemy gauntlets, and to get through the front door of the castle you need to find a small key. You get this by doing the final showdown with King Bulblin. This dude hits really hard this time and actually made me use my fairy. I collected this fairy before the boss of the Forest Temple and I'm just now having to use it. After beating it, he finally concedes and decides to be on our side. It would have been cool if we could team up with his army during the final boss, but they decide just to end his story here, which is kind of a recurring theme during this ending. The climb up Hyrule Castle has some final puzzles and tough encounters, but at the end of the day, it's really just your average linear tower climb. There's no callbacks to any previous dungeons or characters. If there was any time to do a big Ocarina of Time callback to create some truly epic atmosphere, it was here. Hey, remember when Majora's Mask just let you do the final boss? In fact, that could work here. Have the hero squad blast you to the top of the castle and leave everything else for some final optional challenges. As it is, they show up in one cutscene and don't even help you out during the final boss. Nothing about the story really matters at this point because Midna's story has already been resolved. All you'd be missing out on is some more puzzles and an okay dramatic track, and honestly I'd rather just get a move on. The castle kind of takes the wind out of the game's sails a little bit. The final boss with Ganondorf has 4 phases. One with Zelda that's a Phantom Ganon callback, one with Beast Ganon that uses the wolf, one in Hyrule Field where you fight on horseback, and a mano-a-mano sword fight to close out the game. I accidentally skipped the cutscene that starts the fight because I thought it would be really funny if I was trying to skip an unskippable cutscene because I don't care about Zelda or Ganondorf, but then I skipped it, my bad. Each fight is epic in scale and presentation, but it lacks the proper build-up or story payoff to actually mean anything. I mean, what if during the Beast Ganon fight, the hero squad teams up with Wolf Link despite his appearance to trap the beast and help you out? What if during the horseback fight, King Bulblin follows the strongest side, like he said, and you have to maneuver around his men fighting off Ganons? Those would be great moments that would mean something and add to the story, but as it is, these characters just showed up to kind of wrap things up, and Ganondorf just has a series of decent fights. The final battle does have some good atmosphere at least. It doesn't really feel like you can do anything crazy with your optional moves to whittle him down. If any boss should have had that built in, it should have been Ganondorf if you ask me. But finally stabbing him in the chest actually feels pretty good. The ending of the game is pretty standard and ruins even that slick final moment though. Ganondorf says some more edgy junk, like, no, bud, I think you mean animated blood. Zant helps from beyond the grave and snaps his neck, which I guess is cool for his character, but it doesn't really make any sense. And then it's finally over. Midna gets turned back into a hot lady, but I refuse to dwell on that because I find it extremely weird, so wow, Hyrule is saved. The credits bring back the N64 method of showing previous characters living their best lives again. It's a shame I only liked these characters at best, because otherwise I'd say this is even better than Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask's credits. But for what it's worth, I think these credits help remind you of just how long this game really is. In the middle of it, Midna says goodbye and runs through the portal, which has the insanely typical you need light and darkness spiel that these sorts of stories like to cram in. Stop it, Zelda. This isn't freaking Sonic Unleashed or Twilight or Vampire Diaries or Supernatural or Wallace and Gromit. Eventually, there's this final shot of a sculpture of the goddesses and the Triforce. It's kinda cool, I guess, but it's nowhere near as personal as the N64 game's ending shots. I'm really just kind of over it at this point. So as you can tell, I'm fairly mixed on this one. Looking back, I think it's fair to say that a lot of my points have to do with whether or not I think things in this game have been done better or worse than their counterparts in previous games. Now, to be fair, throughout this retrospective and the Majora's Mask and Wind Waker videos, I did also make comparisons to Ocarina of Time, but I think both of those games did enough things substantially differently that I was discussing two unique approaches to the same topic. Obviously, an art style overworld, dungeons with various common themes, and big epic fantasy stories are going to appear throughout the Zelda series, and this is especially true for the Zelda series because it's so old. It just turned 35 last year, and the series was turning 20 and had 12 previous entries by the time Twilight Princess released. I think the difference between Twilight Princess and something like Majora's Mask or The Wind Waker is that those games can be compared with Ocarina of Time as part of an evolving series, and most of those comparisons will be about how drastically different they are. But Twilight Princess very openly invokes similar imagery to both of the N64 games, but especially Ocarina of Time. So any comparisons you end up making will be about how the exact same scenario was handled between two games. What happens as a result is that Twilight Princess will either handle those same things well, or slightly better, or slightly worse than before. What you end up with is a grab bag of quality. Since this game wants to be compared to other games so badly, I guess that's what my conclusion should be. Ocarina of Time is a better adventure in Hyrule. The scale of the world isn't bloated and the story stays pretty focused. The pacing is really brisk and the game is still really fun to play through. Twilight Princess obviously is more technically impressive as a later game, but its story is all over the place and it presents a game world that's more fully realized but is full of brain-dead 3D models executing computer language instead of characters. Even with the terrible translation, Ocarina of Time still had characters that felt like people. Majora's Mask is a better Dark Zelda game. It had this liberty mainly because it didn't take place in Hyrule, and so you had all this bizarre and sometimes horrifying shit just happen. You could take that in stride because this was a new place in the Zelda series, but it also worked way better because the game didn't shove stupid angsty Evanescence bullshit in your face. For what it's worth, Majora's Mask also bothered being more poppy and colorful than Twilight Princess. And speaking of that, Wind Waker has a better and more cohesive art style than Twilight Princess. That game's character design, color palette, and unique use of cell shading helped to give it its own identity, and it still looks incredible to this day. I'd even go as far as to say that the GameCube version looks better than Twilight Princess HD. Yeah, I said that. And I'm not repulsed by the idea that both of these games are follow-ups to Ocarina of Time's story. story, but the Wind Waker definitely had a more straightforward and well-structured narrative that had a lot to say about looking forward to the future, which fits in with the drastic change in art direction. I can't really say the same thing about Twilight Princess's story, which feels more like Link just cleaning up everybody's messes for them, and only one of those people apologized and grew. All that being said, Twilight Princess is still left with a surprising amount of stuff on its own. The Twilight, Midna, Wolf Link, some new characters, new music, and some standout story moments. I will also give credit to the game for having some massive new interpretations of some staple Zelda locations. Just looking at that list though, you start to see that the game has good and bad in it, even when looking at its own ideas. Exploring an area in the Twilight realm doesn't add much, Wolf Link doesn't add anything really, and the new characters don't do a whole lot. I mentioned at the start of this video that this Zelda game was intended to be for American audiences. Now, I don't know about you, but when I think of American media, I tend to think of stuff that gets too big for its own good and then takes itself way too seriously so that huge nerds just mindlessly consume it and don't feel like they're wasting their time, I guess. I think the attempts at darker themes and the abundance of set pieces in Twilight Princess are a result of the Zelda team picking up on this. This has definitely hurt the game in a lot of ways, even though it wowed general audiences when it first came out. It looks really old, and the pacing is really wonky, which makes subsequent playthroughs difficult to get started. I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea here and think that I just hate this game. My favorite thing about the Zelda series is the emotional sincerity you can glean from its polished mechanics and imagery. Midna's character arc, the large scale of the world, some sillier moments, and the excellent dungeons are what resonate with me the most here. And I'm more than willing to admit that the development of the more realistic style and big fat awesome set pieces came from a good place too. It wasn't just a cynical cash grab. Aonuma said as much in an interview. He said, "While I was making Twilight Princess, I was listening to the theme on an iPod while walking hand in hand with my child, and I suddenly burst into tears. I was thinking about all the awful trials Link would have to go through in the new game. I realized that Link really is my other child." Now that kind of thing really moves me, honestly. It's good to know that the people making these games love the series as much as I do, even if I disagree with a lot of their creative decisions at times. And at the end of the world, that's all these videos are. Me discussing creative decisions. I know I've probably ticked off a ton of Twilight Princess stans, but I want you all to know that I still really like this game. Despite all the comparing and contrasting, this game has a ton of great qualities, just like its older siblings. And now that I finally finished blurting out all my thoughts on this game, I'm gonna go take a nap.